Well, Greg, all's well that ends well in West Lafayette, but in the beginning, boy, the Nebraska offense really kind of seemed to sleepwalk through that first half.
Couldn't find any rhythm, couldn't get any kind of running game going at all, only 8 yards of rushing at the half. And credit Purdue's defensive front. They were active, they were solid, and they really kept Nebraska off balance. And thank goodness Nebraska's defense was holding up fairly well to keep Nebraska within shouting distance to make that terrific comeback.
So knowing the struggles that the Huskers had in the first half running the football, were you surprised to see them go for it on 4th and 1 from the 45?
A little bit. But at the time you didn't feel like it was that big of a risk, and obviously it didn't work and gave the short field for the Boilermakers. So, I just think Mike Riley was looking for some kind of a spark, something to try to kickstart the team a little bit, show the team that he had confidence that they could go get that yard, and it didn't work that particular play for them.
So they score on that drive. They later, right before the half, score on an 86-yard touchdown drive. It's 14-6 of the half. Thank goodness for Drew Brown. He at least kept the Huskers in the game.
Sure did, and one of the great stories of the week was his holder, who normally is Zach Darlington. Zach was left behind in Lincoln. He was not feeling well, so he didn't make the trip, and so Isaac Armstrong, and then a walk-on to the program, is the backup holder, and he had to hold on a very cold night in West Lafayette, and would have been pretty easy to not put down one of those snaps. And, you wonder about the psyche of the kicker, knowing that it's not his number one guy holding the football. So it all worked out well, and you like the fact that Drew's consistent and can make all those, but it also showed the Nebraska's inability to do a lot inside the red zone. And, Jeff, that's tied back to the lack of a running game. When you can't run the ball, you're just really limited when you get down inside the red zone. And that's a concern as we hit these last 4 games of this season.
So finally in the second half, a little bit of a spark in the running game. We see Jalen Bradley, who equals his number of carries for the entire year in that second half with 7 runs for 42 yards.
Yeah, Mike Riley had said all week the plan was to get him some significant snaps, and he did provide a spark, showed the ability to get to the edge and run with some toughness. The unfortunate thing is late in the game he rolled an ankle and doesn't look like he'll be able to play in this Northwestern game tomorrow. So that's too bad. You just feel like you had a guy start to find a little bit of rhythm in the offense, and now he won't be able to play this week.
And earlier in the year, if you had asked Tanner Lee to throw the ball 50 times, that would have been a nightmare because Tanner was not as accurate. But, of course, then in that game last week, he throws the ball 50 times, doesn't turn the ball over at all, does get sacked 3 times, but really had one of his best games in a Nebraska uniform.
Spread the football around a lot. 10 of the 32 completions went to the running backs. Big game for Tyler Hoppus at tight end. And so it wasn't just look for Spielman, look for Morgan, look for Pearson-L. It was able to get the ball into the hands of some different people. And I know Husker fans may not want to hear this, but that might have to be the formula for this team here in 2017, that probably is going to give them their best option to move the football and score points, is to just let Tanner start to air it out. Now, you can't totally abandon the run. You're going to have to try to run. But if you look at the last 4 weeks of this season, Nebraska is going to play some pretty good run defenses. And so the best formula for Nebraska for this year at least may just be let's ride the right arm of Tanner Lee.
And those 2 fourth-quarter touchdown drives, he drives them 70 yards to pull him within 5. And then on that last drive, 7 of 8 on that drive before hitting Stanley Morgan for that touchdown.
Not sure you could script it really any better than that. I mean, he was accurate, and credit to guys like Divine Ezigbo for getting out of bounds. If Nebraska gets tackled inbounds one more time, I don't know that they pull off the upset. But Ezigbo a couple of times was stretching and reaching for the out-of-bounds marker. Tyler Hoppus had a catch on the sideline that he was able to get out of bounds as well. So that was a key. So, yeah, you give a lot of credit to Tanner Lee, but also some guys who made some catches and they had the awareness to get themselves out of bounds and stop the clock and give Nebraska a chance to put together that terrific final drive.
And while they're doing that, the defense, as you mentioned, Greg, was stiffening up and really did a really nice job on 3rd down against Purdue.
Sure did. And, we always say such a great team game, and it is. Because, Nebraska went for it on fourth down at the 15-yard line with about 4.5 minutes to go, down 5. They don't get any points on that drive. And Nebraska's down to 2 timeouts left. If Purdue gets 2 first downs at the end of the game, they win it.
Yeah.
Nebraska doesn't even get the ball back. Well, they got 1, but they couldn't get the second one. So credit the defense for getting the offense the football back with enough time to get this thing done. And so both sides of the ball felt pretty good running off the field last week. They they were big contributors to that win.
So the 2-game losing streak is over, and now here comes Northwestern, and you look up and you say, hey, wait a minute, this game is for sole possession of second place in the Big Ten West.
How about that? Yeah, both teams sitting there at 3-2 in the league, and Nebraska, I think you felt like we're going to be at least 3-2 at this point in time with early games with Rutgers and Illinois, and then you knew Northwestern had an uphill climb because they started the league playing Wisconsin and Penn State, and they were in an 0-2 hole. But they're playing much better football. They've won 3 in a row, including back-to-back overtime wins over Iowa and Michigan State. And for whatever reason, Jeff, they seem to play really well at Memorial Stadium.
Yeah.
This will be their 4th trip to Lincoln since Nebraska joined the Big Ten. The final margins of victory have been 3, 3, and 2 points, with Northwestern winning 2 of those. And the only Husker win at home since joining the Big Ten over Northwestern was the Hail Mary at the end of the game from Ron Kellogg to Jordan Westerkamp.
The last thing Nebraska fan needs to hear right now is that you've got a good running defense coming into your place because, of course, Nebraska really hasn't done anything on the ground. But the good news is Northwestern has been really, really porous in that secondary, second worst pass defense in the Big Ten.
Sure have, and I think that it's partly because they're so good on rush defense that teams just go, we're going to have to throw it to win, and that goes back to my earlier comment that I think that's what Nebraska is just going to have to do in this game tomorrow, try to throw the football and ride the arm of Tanner Lee. Now, again, you don't want to just throw it 50 times and run it 5. You've got to try to throw a few runs in there as well, but I think the best way to attack Northwestern is going to be through the air and to try to push the ball down the field.
Let's talk about a couple of their talented players on defense, and it starts at the linebackers. Nate Hall and redshirt freshman Patty Fisher's really having a nice year.
What a great name, isn't it? Patty Fisher. Great. Surprise, surprise, at Northwestern, under Pat Fitzgerald has good linebacker play. I mean, that's what he was as a player at Northwestern, and he's got those guys playing really well. Patty Fisher is the current Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week. He's a redshirt freshman making all kinds of tackles all over the field. Nate Hall, another one of their linebackers, has been really good. In fact, he had the interception at the end of the game to seal it over Michigan State last week. So those guys are good. And, I talked to Coach Fitzgerald earlier in the week, and while I was pointing out his linebackers, he was quick to say, hey, but our guys up front are doing a really good job occupying blockers so those kids can make their way to make some tackles. So there's some parts of this defense that are pretty solid for Northwestern and will certainly make Nebraska work to try to get points on the board.
Offensively, Justin Jackson, 81 yards a game, although Northwestern has not had a great year running the football, similar to Nebraska.
Isn't it weird? I mean, they're both teams are looking for some consistency in this whole thing.
Yeah.
And they're both trying to find some rhythm offensively. And Jackson is a really good back, but yet he can't get it cranked up and going. And Nebraska's done a decent job against him in his career. He's the all-time leading rusher for the Wildcats, and yet the Huskers have done a good job in his 3 years playing against Nebraska, kind of controlling him. And I would expect more of the same from Bob Diaco's defense tomorrow.
And we've seen Tanner Lee run for his life at times this year, but I don't think anybody's running for their lives more than Clayton Thorson. I mean, he's been sacked 24 times already, and when he hasn't been sacked, he's been hurried into throwing 9 picks.
Yeah, their offensive line was really messy early. It's gotten better lately. They're playing better, protecting him a little bit better than they were early in the season. They just had a real rough stretch of games in September where they got rolled at Duke, and then the back-to-back Wisconsin-Penn State games, a little bit like Nebraska having to go back-to-back with Wisconsin-Ohio State. That's a tough 2-week run, and they got beat up on that. But they've responded as a team with those 3 straight wins, playing better, blocking better for Thorson up front. Thorson, in the past, where he's hurt Nebraska, Jeff, has been with his legs. Mm-hmm. He can pull it down and run with the football, or they'll maybe call some design quarterback runs. He's a big, tall fella that's a better athlete than you think, and Nebraska will have to be careful not to let him get out of the box a couple times tomorrow. So
the Huskers back home at 2:30 kick, and frankly, Nebraska trying to do something to please the home fans. It's been a while since we've seen a winning game in Memorial Stadium.
Sure has. The last time that happened was the last time the sun was out when Nebraska played a football game, and that was Rutgers back in September. Nebraska's had the 4 straight night games and then the bye week, so it's been a long time since the Huskers have had the daylight around them when they play a football game. That's going to be kind of nice tomorrow to have a middle of the afternoon game for the Big Red.
You mentioned Jalen Bradley. What does everything else look like on the injury front?
Well, the offensive line sure took a beating last week. Michael Decker's out for the year. He had surgery on Thursday on a knee, and so his season is over, unfortunately. And Tanner Farmer also got hurt in the game last week, and he's going to be out a couple of weeks. So Nebraska's going to go back to Cole Conrad at center, who was the starting center when the year began, and now Matt Farniak, who's played tackle, is going to play right guard and start for that game for Nebraska. On the defensive side of the ball, the safety position has certainly been rocked by injuries. Aaron Williams did practice on Thursday. He may try to go, but I don't know how many plays he can give Nebraska. Antonio Reed also has practiced some this week. I think he'll try it for the Huskers. The big news to me is that Luke Gifford won't play again. That's 2 straight weeks for not having Luke Gifford, who's been one of the better defenders for Nebraska all year long.